Welcome to the Rennie Center's Community Conversation as part of our annual report on the condition of education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My name is Chad D'Entremont, and I am the Executive Director of the Rennie Center for Education, Research, and Policy. Today, it is my privilege to introduce our community panel, including representatives from program exemplars featured in the 2022 report. Before we begin, please allow me to say a few quick words about the Rennie Center itself. We are an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to ensure educational decision-making is based on deep knowledge and evidence of effective policymaking and practice. We pursue this mission in 3 key steps, and while it may sound straightforward and orderly, it's messy and rarely works fully this way in practice. First, we go out into the field and endeavor to conduct research that uncovers what's working and where persistent challenges remain. Second, we take this information directly to the ground. We engage communities, districts, schools, and practitioners in sharing research findings, helping them apply them, and building their capacity to lead and own their own improvement strategies moving forward. And third, we learn from these experiences, and we take these learnings directly to state and local policymakers to provide guidance on large-scale systemic reforms that will improve our entire educational system. The Condition of Education project is our flagship endeavor, and it includes an action guide where we identify program exemplars and then offer policy recommendations on strategies that could be applied immediately in the coming year to drive improvement. Each action guide centers on a particular theme, and this year we're looking explicitly at educator supports and organizations, programs, and strategies that are assisting educators in navigating incredibly difficult working conditions during the COVID pandemic, while also charting a path forward toward recovery and sustained long-term success. We also feature a data dashboard that tracks a series of indicators from birth all the way to adulthood, so we can keep track of how our whole education system is progressing and identify specific areas to engage and where we can leverage new strategies to drive systemic improvement. And finally, we engage in a whole host of outreach activities to make sure that the work we're doing is shared directly with the field, that it has an impact. This is principally done through a release event for our action guide this year that will take place on January 26th at 9 a.m., although all items are recorded and can be found on the Rennie Center's website, www.renniecenter.org. And now it's my pleasure to turn to our actual panel and make sure we hear from community representatives. Today's panel will be moderated by Dr. Jessica Boston Davis. She's the Director for Equity and Excellence at Somerville Public Schools, and worth noting, a member of the Rennie Center's Board of Directors. She's joined by representatives from 3 separate organizations. First, Sarah Cullen and Stephanie Perazzo are both consulting teachers as part of Colleague to Colleague, or C2C, in Revere Public Schools. This program enables teachers of record to step outside of the classroom and act as instructional coaches to their peers on areas where they have interest, experience, and expertise. Next, Marilla Dela Cruz, who is the manager at the Lawrence Working Families Initiative, and Catherine Lopez Arias, who's Director of Workforce Development at Lawrence Community Works, will talk about work that is happening in Lawrence to bring community residents into the school system, support and salary them as paraprofessionals, and put them on a professional pathway towards becoming teachers of record. This innovative strategy has helped strengthen both the capacity and diversity of Lawrence's educator workforce. And finally, Mark Costan is the Associate Director of the Great Schools Partnership. Great Schools is a national organization that does a whole host of things. But today, Mark will be talking about professional learning groups, and specifically how GSP works with districts and schools to build teachers' capacity to collaborate in moving forward effective instructional practices. I'm sure they will have a lot more to say about each of their programs, and we all have a lot to learn. So with that, I will hand things back to Dr. Jessica Boston Davis so she can lead us into the panel discussion. Jess, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I am thrilled to be here and really excited to learn about the work that you all are doing in your organizations. So to start our conversation off, we'll start with an opening question and hear from everyone before we go to a few more focused questions. In our opening question, I'm hoping to hear from each of you, what has been one challenge and one bright spot in your work with educators since the disruption of learning brought about by COVID-19? So let's start with Sarah and Stephanie. If you can introduce yourselves, share a bit about your organization, and speak to that opening question.
My name is Stephanie Perazzo. I work as part of the Colleague to Colleague program in the Revere public school system. Our Colleague to Colleague program is a one-on-one professional development opportunity where teachers voluntarily participate to collaborate with a consulting teacher who is an instructional coach on anything that they choose. So we work to set meaningful goals, and then we provide that support for them. So during this pandemic, a challenge, of course, has been the lack of being in person. Has been less time to spend with people. There's a lot of pressure to get things done. But a bright spot with all of that is that it's really allowed us to reprioritize in education and reintroduce the human first approach in thinking about what people need as humans.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Sarah, anything you want to add if you just want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Cullen, and I am lucky to call myself Stephanie's coworker and colleague to colleague. We both got started in this role in the 2019-2020 school year. So we didn't get a chance to know much of what our job would be like before all of a sudden everything changed. I would echo obviously what she said about the program. And I think the biggest challenge has just been, the obvious unparalleled teacher burnout. Folks that work with us sign up to do so. And so they want to experiment and discuss and have sessions with us, and they know that, but it's often been the case that when we show up and sit down to have these conversations, we take a long time to get to, and maybe don't even get to at all that day, the real work, but really just kind of helping them decompress. So that's definitely been tough to watch and be a part of. I think the bright spot is the pandemic, and the stress that has come along with it has sort of, I think, maybe gave me permission to do a lot of things that I maybe wouldn't have before as a coach. For example, doing way more with meeting folks outdoors. We are lucky enough to have an outdoor space at our school. So I say oh, do you want to meet at the picnic tables? And just that need for fresh air, I think especially last year was so huge, or even incorporating some play or taking walks into our session time is something that, again, I might not have really given myself permission to do before the world fell apart, but now I see is so necessary now and would have been such a benefit before times anyways.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And great to meet you. All right, let's go to Catherine and Marilla. Can you share a little bit about your organization and answer our opening questions?
Sure. My name is Marilla Dela Cruz, and I'm the manager of the Lawrence Working Families Initiative here at Lawrence Public Schools in partnership with Lawrence Community Works. And the goal of the Lawrence Working Families Initiative is to ensure that our families are stable, whether it's financially, with housing, and employment. We provide trainings, et cetera, to our parents and adult learners of the community. One of the challenging things I would say that occurred during the pandemic would have to be kind of just going remote from one day to another. We had no idea what we were doing. We were trying to figure things out with the with the groups and the cohorts that we had to train them. And so this is what you do. Even with Google, they had no idea. So that pretty much kind of, got the ball rolling with us having to, which a bright spot, which is having to train them from here on. Like these are new skills, new tools that they didn't have before. So we are ensuring to incorporate that in all our cohorts and our training programs to make sure that they are equipped if, God forbid, this happens again. Obviously, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but it's not as bad as where it was. But I would say those are two bright and spots that we had as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. Did you want to add anything?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Catherine Lopez Arias. I'm the director for the Workforce Development Department at Lawrence Community Works. We have several programs to help adults get back into the work field. We have computer training, one that's specifically for the financial service sector, banking, and to work in credit union. We also offer ESOL class, and then we partnership with the Lawrence Public School and other partners of the community. We do the para-educator program. Like Marianela said, one of the biggest struggle was that instant switch. I still remember 2 years ago, was it that this all started? We had a staff meeting and it was, we're gonna work from home for 2 weeks. And here we are 2 years later, we're still trying to start to get back. But that was one of the main things, like not stopping the programming because we didn't want to interrupt that. We knew a participant needed our support. So we had to quickly learn, search, take trainings. I cannot even number how many we had to take so quickly in order to be able to provide for our participants. But in the bright side, we now have different options, right? We don't need to cancel our programs in snow day. We have that blended learning module that we can take on and keep going. So it has brought a lot of positive because we are able to serve in different ways, even for people that couldn't come to, for example, ESOL classes because of childcare issues at night. Now they're taking it from home. So we do see a lot of the benefits that came out of it. And although we want to go back to normal, I think that these new things that we've learned, it's going to definitely make normal more better.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And Mark, to you, I'm hoping you can introduce yourself and your organization and then speak to the opening question.
Super. Thank you, Jess. My name is Mark Costan. I'm the Associate Director of the Great Schools Partnership. We're a national nonprofit support organization. And while we're based in Portland, Maine, we do support currently about 12 or so schools, districts, and communities across the state of Massachusetts. I think like my fellow panelists mentioned, a number of challenges and a couple of bright spots. I would say one of the greatest challenges as a result of the pandemic was just the significance and the realization of the loss of personal relationship building that comes with being face-to-face. I see that in our own family with our twin high school students who just suffered tremendously from not being able to see their peers on a regular basis and their teachers on a regular basis. And I certainly noticed that in our work, supporting adult learning and supporting teachers, just not being able to be there face-to-face, and especially in the earliest months of the pandemic, just the uncertainty where everything was upended. There are a number of bright spots, and I think in particular, like Catherine, you mentioned, just a tremendous amount of innovation and just the tools and the strategies that our colleagues developed and that the teachers we support developed for engaging, supporting, connecting with folks online. Really, I think we made the most of the situation. We were able to host monthly sessions with hundreds of educators from across the country who, spent little precious time they had on their own wanting to connect with other colleagues across the country. So just that sort of immediate sense of building a national community was extraordinarily helpful. And then on a local level, just it led to increased opportunities and strategies that I think districts and communities are able to do to engage with one another, things that might not have been possible before.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And we're actually going to stay with you here if I can ask you a follow-up question and further learn about the Great Schools Partnership and the supports from your organization. So the Great Schools Partnership supports districts to form effective communities of professional growth. Can you talk to how GSPs model for professional learning groups and the benefit they have for the districts you work with?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I would say first and foremost, the notion of professional learning groups. In some settings, it's professional learning communities, and in others, it might be communities of practice. From our perspective, is one of the sort of the core tenets or the key practices to sparking and sustaining innovation and ongoing school improvement. I think it's critical to recognize, as I think Judith Warren Little said, the wisdom is in the room, that there is so much collective expertise and knowledge and pedagogy that has been cultivated within a school building, that it's really up to leaders and supporters in those schools and communities to figure out a way to harness that, to give voice to teachers who, unfortunately, in some situations, don't have an opportunity to sort of have agency around their own professional learning and ongoing professional communities, professional development. And so we see professional learning groups as a key strategy to that kind of ongoing improvement. However, PLGs don't just happen because we create the time and space for teachers to come together. It requires careful sort of maintenance and design and ongoing support to cultivate that community so that there's trust, that there's the development and rallying around or use of a shared language, that adults learn best when they're in situations where they feel supported, where they feel that taking a risk and being vulnerable is something that they can entrust with their colleagues. And in order to create that environment and keep it going throughout the course of the year, it's critical that every professional learning group really needs to have a trained and knowledgeable facilitator. And so in our model, in many of, if not most of the schools and districts across the country we support, we emphasize the creation and the growth of PLGs. And so what that means typically is that there's at least one period of uninterrupted, let's say between 75 and maybe hopefully in some cases up to 90 minutes a month, where teachers have an opportunity to come together to learn with and from one another. And they're in charge of their agenda. They're usually bringing student work or teacher work or potentially a dilemma or a problem of practice. The facilitator is charged with ensuring that there's an appropriate design, there's a setting, there's a way, there's a flow where that time together is meaningful and productive, and that really it's a sort of a recognition that teachers have the best sense of what the challenges, the dilemmas are, and really are, as agents of their own professional learning, really hold the key to what will help support their own students learning best.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm really struck by how creating these really effective spaces and making the time for the space for the teachers to have these collaborations, how impactful that can be. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that. Marianella and and Catherine, I'm going to come to you next. So the Lawrence Working Families Initiative, in partnership with Lawrence Public Schools, has created career opportunities in the classroom for community members. What is the importance of homegrown educator talent and minority representation in schools? And if you can speak to a bit of how does the Lawrence Working Families Initiative work to address that, that would be great.
Sure. So I'll take the first part of that question. So our mission at the Lawrence Working Families Initiative is obviously to stabilize and to help support Lawrence. And why is it specifically nurturing homegrown talent? Why is it so important? Well, we thought as a district, why not tap into our parents, our adult learners? We have it in our community. We need to do better and dig deep in regards to providing these parents with those jobs in our schools, providing these adult learners with those jobs that it's so hard for us to fill. And of course it's important because our students see a familiar face. They know the language, they know the culture. This is a teacher or a para that shops in the bodega in the corner. Like, this is just so much more impactful than we think it is. And parents overall just become more comfortable with connecting with educators, rather than one parent liaison that may speak Spanish. It's pretty much universal. When you go in there, there's a connection with the language, etc. And as a result, family engagement has increased in our district by having more adults and teachers that look like us. Students with the same racial characteristics of their teachers report higher academically. We all know that, and their behavioral levels increase. And we've seen it with a lot of our programs, that this is extremely important, and districts should start tapping into definitely their homegrown talent. Catherine, I'm not sure if you wanted to pick up on the second part of that question.
Yes, so the way that we are addressing this huge need that the public schools have is we have the paraeducator program that was designed with many different partners throughout the city. It wasn't just Lawrence Community Works and Lawrence Public School. We have this 9-month program where for the first half of the program, they are supported by a teacher just to help them pass the Para-Pro state test, which is an equivalent to a 2-year college degree that they do need to work as a paraeducator in any school. The second part of the program is the second semester, where we support them with paid internships. Everybody gets placed in a school and they do get paid to do it. We also offer a college class. It's a free 3-credit college class, Intro to Teaching, that is taught by one of our local community college, Northern Essex. And we also keep supporting them in all the different things that they need to succeed in these new jobs that they're looking for. Excuse me. We do financial coaching with everybody. Everyone is on a one-on-one with a coach, sits down, goes over their credit, their budget, just to help them understand what is it going to look like when I have a job? How am I going to spend my money? How can I save money? And how can I stabilize financially my family? So we take all that and we put it into this loan program, but it's very successful. A lot of the people that are doing it make it a huge sacrifice by signing up to it, because it is long, but at the end, a lot of them get placed during their internship or right after it. So that's the thing that we like, that a lot of these parents are working most of the time in the same school that they have their kids in, which is great. And then, did I miss anything on the program this time, Marinette? I think everything was covered.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you. That is so inspiring. Representation matters. Seeing yourself as a child in a school matters. And the staff representing and your family being represented matters. And so the work you do is incredibly important. I really thank you for that. How have you mentioned that the program has been really successful, and it sounds like it. What are some things you hear from participants after they've taken that sacrifice and they've gone through the program and now they're hired? What are some things that you hear from them? How do they describe their experience and their time thereafter?
That's a great question. Obviously, it's a long program. I'm not going to say that we're not having conversation where they may want to fall out and not continue, but they push through. And once they hit that internship mark, they realize they need to be in a classroom. Like, I need to be there. And beyond that, we've had students that want to continue their education and become teachers. Like, because of that, we've developed the MTEL Bootcamp, where we have paras who went through our program, parents, and are now looking into being educators. So this is a pipeline that has opened an array of conversation and more supports for them to be a teacher. Like, they can do it when they're doing their internships and the paras, they're like, oh, but I can do that. What that teacher is doing, what do I do, Marianella? Catherine, sign me up. So we see them, a flood of them wanting to get more support to be educators.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to add was that, like, the students that we have are a major source of referrals. We have one participant that just graduated in the last group, and she's already working. she already called us up and was like, I have 3 people ready. When do you start next? So it's definitely like exciting to hear them talk to the friends and family about the program and seeing that people are interested in doing this type of work.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for sharing that with
Very
us.
welcome.
And thank you for the work that you do. That is really inspiring. Now bringing it to Sarah and Stephanie. I would love to hear a little bit about, you speak to the success of your district's colleague-to-colleague program. And with that success, can you, I know that you've seen firsthand how impactful it has been when there are trusting relationships among school staff. How was the C2C model developed? And what impacts have you seen on the participating educators and students that you work with?
Yes, so Stephanie and I are super happy to be here and talking about this. As we said, right now, we are working as consulting teachers in the colleague-to-colleague program. And both of us started out in the colleague-to-colleague program as participating teachers. So we were the coachees before we ever dreamed of becoming the coaches. So we've really been able to learn so much and see the program from all sides. The origin of the program in our district was about 5 or 6 years ago. It was sort of the brainchild of the Revere Education Leadership Board, which is comprised of teachers across the district, and looking for a program to continue the kind of one-on-one support that our mentorship program in the district offers. So when someone is a first-year teacher, they have an assigned mentor, they meet with them regularly, there's trainings and orientations and conversations and opportunities for observation and feedback. And that was for first-year teachers. And then we said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could continue that really immersive, personalized support after the fact? In terms of the impacts, so again, Steph and I have been able to see it from both sides. I think it's a kind of informal way to phrase it, but I think one of the biggest things that comes out of it on both ends is just for teachers to know that they have a person, someone who is definitively 100% in their corner, who shows up every day for their humanity and for their growth as a professional as well in equal measure. That's something that we've really prioritized, especially since the pandemic hit, is to take, as Steph said before, that human-centered approach. And I think also when, as you said, with that trusting relationship, which I love that Mark said earlier about the sort of careful maintenance of those relationships and dynamics. We do that too in a one-on-one. Once you have that and you have this sort of built-in horizontal accountability that we have, myself and my teachers, we're accountable to each other. We set goals together, we speak together, we innovate together, we experiment together. And that's where it is because our role is not evaluative. So when we have that, it really opens the door for innovation and experimentation that wouldn't really exist otherwise if I was that person's supervisor or some other kind of hierarchical relationship.
I would echo what Sarah said and all of those things. I think one of the largest benefits of the C2C program is the fact that it allows educators who are already good the room to grow to become great, which is something that can be neglected in the educational system when you're looking at a triage of where to provide support. And in setting meaningful and personal goals with thought with someone, the growth of the educators who participate in this program is remarkable. One of the greatest impacts, I think, especially looking at this year, is having a learning partner gives you permission to take risks that you may be unwilling to otherwise without the safety of that security that you have someone doing this with you. And this year especially, it's provided someone to do difficult work with. And we've seen teachers taking tremendous risks and engagement with equity work this year because they have that partner to engage in the necessary work that needs to be done to understand some of these difficult things and make those changes that on your own you may not be able or willing to do.
I would
Awesome.
just, I would just add
Please,
one
Sarah.
thing too, because you talked about, or you asked about the impacts on the students as well. I think one of the things that stands out for me with that is the ability for the students to see their teachers as learners. So we spend time in the classroom observing, maybe co-teaching lessons. And part of that being set up in the beginning of the term or the beginning of the year is for the consulting teacher to come in and let the teacher introduce them. And they say, you know, however the teacher wants to do it, but they say like, this is my coach and we have a goal together and I'm a learner. And I just think the idea that students can have that visual of my teacher is a learner, my teacher is invested in his or her or their own growth, and I'm watching it happen because there's another human in the room who I know is there for me as well as for the teacher. I think that's a really powerful message that we are really invested in sending.
Yeah, and our students, they see that, they see the engagement in the process. And then as coaches, we prioritize a student focus in our work. We often involve students in focus groups and ask them, you know, to share their opinions. And we work with educators to honor their choice and give them some agency in the classroom. And a lot of the equity work being done with teachers this year is focused on who is in your classroom right now and what can we do to improve education for those people in your classroom.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I was going to ask a question about this, a follow-up question about the student impact. So I really appreciate you saying how important it is for students to see their teachers as learners, and that really establishing this idea of continuous and ever evolving learning, no matter who you are or what your role is or how old you are. So I really appreciate that. From that, I'm wondering, what I hear you saying is teacher as a learner and as a leader. And I wonder if there were anything else that came out of this program around educator leadership that you can speak to.
Yeah, I'd say certainly in our role, one of our personal goals as coaches is always to empower the teachers we work with to be leaders. So we may work with one teacher on a team, but our goal is always that we're working together to collaborate on tools and strategies that those teachers then become leaders in sharing within their communities. So whether that's at a professional learning community or a principals meeting, but they're building their self-efficacy and working with us, and then in turn taking that to become teacher leaders in their spheres of influence.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really, really inspired thinking about the educator as a continuous learner and as a leader, and just kind of this human-centered approach that you described, which as I've heard named through everyone, is especially important. Was important before, but especially during these times of COVID, and throughout so much uncertainty, knowing that we are kind of moving forward with a human-centered approach is really, really important. So thank you very much for sharing the work that you're doing in Revere. I have one follow-up question to bring it back up to Mark, and then I would love to kind of close out with everyone with one look-around question. And Mark, I think this aligns very well to what we were just hearing about the program in Revere. But I'm wondering, as I was thinking about your program and thinking about these professional learning groups, I'm wondering what conditions need to be true. Let's say somebody wants to try this in their district or throughout their organization. What needs to be true to establish the rich learning environments amongst educators that you've described?
Yeah, I would say obviously at the very least, what needs to happen is there needs to be time and a space for teachers to meet. And in most cases, we can find some sort of clever, inventive, creative ways to ensure that that happens during the school day. So oftentimes, whether it's a multi-grade or it's a multi-contact grade level kind of multi-contact content area grade team, or could be a content area team, or could be the cluster of teachers who happen to have common planning time at the same time. I mean, there are different ways to sort of create those opportunities for teachers to, it's about making sure that there's a time and a place. I think the other thing that needs to be true, of course, is that there's, we talked about, we, in our work, we ensure that teachers, facilitators have a sense of, there's a little bit of care to design, and that's also identifying what some problems of practice or key areas of learning need to be, and then choosing from a variety of different protocols that are often very, very valuable and helpful, especially since we have such a short and finite amount of time. Protocols are sort of exist to help ensure that all voices in that PLG are heard, and that we're using that time as impactfully as possible. So at least those are there. I think there are other aspects of sort of like a trusting, supportive culture, one where essentially sort of ceding the power or the agency around what's most important, and ensuring that teachers have a voice in identifying what are the most important things that for them is most relevant and crucial to learn with and from one another to help with their students. So I think that those are kind of the ingredients that I would say are critical.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
When you named protocol, that made, as I think back to when I was an educator, that actually kind of takes some weight off of your shoulder. Right. If you have the time and you have the space, you don't have to kind of make it up from scratch. You can have the structure there to guide and facilitate this really important work.
Yeah, and so also like guidelines, right? So that is as a guideline, as well as we often talk about the notion of community agreements, or sometimes referred to as norms. The idea that we're bringing our best selves. We're sort of recognizing that through our learning together, it's going to require potentially some missteps. And when we're unsure, we need to make sure that we clarify. We use I statements. There are particular ways in which we provide feedback and ask questions. There are sort of like practices that become inherent, or habits that become inherent, so that those conversations are meaningful and supportive.
Thank you for adding that. Time and space are crucial for this, and the pre-work of creating the right conditions for that time and space are also just as important, so that we can establish the work that you've described and create those trusting environments. So thank you for sharing all of that. All right, so this is now going to be a wrap-up question for everyone. I'll go in reverse order, so just to prepare yourselves, I'll start with Mark. We just kind of closed with him, so I'll start with Mark, and then we'll go back through our panelists. So in closing, I'd love to hear from you. What is one change you hope to see in the way the education system supports educators in 2022 and beyond?
My answer to this question changed a little bit as I heard from my colleagues on the panel. And so I'll say that inherent in our definition of equity is the notion of raising voices and ceding and acknowledging, ceding and sharing power. And I think first and foremost for me, if there's anything that we've learned and discovered over the course of this very challenging last 2 years, is that it's important for us to acknowledge and give each other permission to say that these 2 years have been really hard. That without a doubt, we have all struggled. And I think professional learning groups are really promising spaces and places where there's an opportunity for us to just sort of come together and just sort of share how we're doing and just give ourselves permission. And I think that the notion of my hope is that administrators and decision makers recognize the importance and the role and the value of creating that space for teachers, just as we want to ensure that students have a primary person, have agency, and are developing relationships and feel as though they're part of a community. It's really important to ensure that we're tending to that and ensuring that we're supporting teachers in that way. So my hope is that we recognize and see the value, and note that it's going to need to be, it's going to require some changes in the way we might historically have made decisions about how to use our collaboration time. Trust teachers.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, to Lawrence with Marinella and Catherine, can you share?
I would have to say we work with a community that's Spanish speaking predominantly. And a lot of these para teachers, it's difficult. Their native language isn't English. So these MTELs, I know the state have been talking about it. I know it's possibly in the works, but I would hope to see it where we're supporting them more through the process. The MTELs are not at all easy, as most of us know, but channeling it in a way where we can equip our paras to become teacher in a very easier way instead of having the MTEL over their head. Because we have those conversations constantly. This is why we developed the MTEL boot camp to try to get them over that hump. But it's been difficult. Many of them have tried and have not passed. So that's, I think, something that the state should look into deeper, especially when we want to diversify how.
Yes, I agree to that too. And as well, keep supporting every educator now with these hard times. And again, like more training, more also materials and all that support that they need to be able to do it. And also, let's not forget that they're also human beings, right? Like, make sure that in their personal life, they get the support that they need at the time that they need their family.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then finally, back to Revere, Sarah and Stephanie, if you can share your thoughts on our closing question.
So I echo what everyone said. I think we teachers need more grace. They need more time. In that spirit, I think we need to bring the level of personalization that we want for our students to the adults. And I think we need to prioritize giving teachers time and space to direct their own learning, to set meaningful goals, both personally and professionally, and then be given that space as part of their job to work on that and to really dive deep into the adult learning that needs to happen to improve education for our children.
This question is really difficult for me because I can think of about 700 things I'd like to see changed. To narrow it down to one feels really difficult. But I would piggyback on what everyone has said, and obviously that theme of, educators are humans first, and we need to continue on in that way, even after hopefully eventually the pressure of this pandemic comes off a bit. But I would also just say, if I'm going to dream really big, what I would love to see happen in schools is just an actual effort to make a really positive culture of feedback. One of the things that we do is provide teachers with timely feedback on their instruction and on their planning and on their assessment methods. And it's so difficult with evaluation systems spreading administrators really thin to get that kind of timely feedback. So I'd love to see that happen for every educator on the things that they want feedback on, and then for all of that to just also flow vertically as well, that we can have the same values surrounding growth and learning and feedback from colleague to colleague, pun intended, I guess, but also from teacher to administrator and from teacher to student and back, just the whole process to really flow, and for learning and mistake making and risk taking to be valued, and for us to do more than just say that we value it.
Thank you. Despite it being a difficult choice, I think that was a really powerful answer. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for your participation in this panel. This has been such a rich conversation. I wrote down a few words as you were all speaking. I wrote down a lot of notes, but the things that stuck out, themes across what everyone was saying around innovation, reprioritization, voice, family engagement, most of all, this human-centeredness, which I've heard throughout everything. And I want to close with a quote that Mark shared with us earlier, because I think it really resonates even in this panel, is that the wisdom is in the room. There's so much wisdom on this panel, And I really thank you for your time and thank you for the work you do for our students. So thank you. Chad, should I pass it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. And thank you for your moderation, and a big thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences and your expertise. I am sure around the internet, there is silent applause coming your way as people have listened in on what you had to share. I also want to offer just a few closing thoughts. One is that it can seem really hard right now, obviously, to do anything new or different in trying to get through the day. But I think these are real examples of how educators are supporting each other and the types of supports we need to bring into the system to help manage the current moment. Building from within schools, from within communities, and tapping into teachers and local residents as the primary resource is a way forward that allows those who are on the front lines of doing the work to lead the way. And that is imminently doable, even in difficult times. Second, I know we all feel this sense of urgency to recover immediately, to get students back what we feel they lost. But what we also heard from today's panelists is despite doing this doesn't mean it needs to happen tomorrow. Creating the time and space that attends to educators' wellness and allows them to properly plan for recovery not only will strengthen our workforce, will strengthen educators, will use that wisdom in the room, but I would argue will produce better results for our students over the long term, because we'll find the right way forward, not just a way forward. And that's really important in this moment. I want to thank everyone one last time for being with us today. Please join us for the release of all of the condition of education materials, especially the release of our action guide on Wednesday, January 26th at 9 a.m. We will be joined by Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, Jim Pizer, as well as our commissioners of early education and care, elementary and secondary education, and higher education to reflect on what is happening during the pandemic and share their own strategies for helping move the system forward. You can find more information about what you heard about today, as well as the full bios of all of our panelists at the Rennie Center's website. Go to renniecenter.org and click on Condition of Education in the top line banner. At that location, you'll also find ways to sign up for other events and download resources that we're continuing to share as we look at how our educational system is doing right now and how we move forward. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. We hope to see you in person someday soon.